Several years ago, we began the practice of reflecting on one of our 5 Benedictine values each year, and then reflecting on the Catholic tradition in the 6th year. In the coming years, there will be fewer sisters living next door and moving among us, a fact that hit with particular force this summer with the death of Sister Mary Jean Tuttle. If we are to remain a Benedictine college in a meaningful sense, we will need as laypersons to work hard at understanding, internalizing, and living the Benedictine values. We've now completed one cycle of reflections, and we're starting over. Our formation is ongoing, and our value for this year is community. Over the years, I've come to believe that the sense of community is the distinctive mark of the St. Scholastica experience. In their presentations to the Board of Trustees last May, all 5 senior leadership finalists independently and unprompted singled out the feeling of community as something decisive in their time here. I regularly hear similar comments from faculty and staff. One example from last spring, an adjunct at the St. Cloud campus spoke about having taught elsewhere, including at some of the colleges we consider to be our competitors, and how the sense of community is so much stronger at St. Scholastica's St. Cloud campus. On the Great Colleges survey that we took last year, pride in the institution was the highest score, an 85% positive response. I think that's an indication of how much this community means to all of us. On a personal note, I will say that I have experienced the powerful support of this community at important moments of my life over the past 23 years, such as the death of my parents and the birth of my children. I've noticed also that if I'm feeling agitated or distracted or off-center, I tend to calm down when I arrive on campus, when I see the well-kept grounds, the clean hallways, and when I begin to receive greetings from co-workers and students. There's an underlying peace and order. This is a special place to work. What I'd like to do this morning is explore with you what it means to be a Benedictine community of learners. And I'll begin with 3 general observations to frame our discussion. First, by community, I mean a particular way of being social. We human beings are inherently social. We say correctly that no person is an island. Our lives are woven from interactions with ancestors, neighbors, and descendants. We are parents. We are children. We are friends. We are siblings. We are social. When we eat alone, we read something. The most terrible punishment I can think of is solitary confinement. We live in society the way a fish lives in water. That we are social beings is a plain fact. The deeper question concerns the quality of our social relations. It is possible to live in society and yet feel alone and alienated. A crowd of strangers, a meaningless job, a failed marriage. Even worse, it is possible to live in society and feel diminished or debased. A caste system, an abusive relationship, a casual racist remark. What we want, what we seek, are social relationships that nourish and expand our humanity, that make us more fully human. And this is what I mean by community. Community is the careful cultivation of our social nature. In this sense, community is a positive term. That's why it sounds odd to talk about a totalitarian community or a community of thugs. A community is a good thing because it helps people flourish. I'd much rather work in a community of co-workers than with a mere group of people. As a teacher, I strive to turn my class of students into a community of learners. I want to worship in a community of believers, not simply in a congregation or an assembly. Community is always a good thing. Second, there are different types of communities, and it's important to clarify which kind of community we're discussing. There are, for example, civic communities, such as liberal democracies. There are therapeutic communities, such as support groups. There are communities of intimacy, such as friends and families, business communities, and so forth. Each type of community has its own point and its own rules, and they aren't necessarily transferable. While we may disagree as citizens about the common good, for example, it's not appropriate to debate the validity of someone's experience in a grief support group. What kind of community is St. Scholastica? What's the best lens for understanding ourselves? In some ways, we resemble a civic community. The faculty assembly, the staff group, the board of trustees all operate in this way. We may find friendship and personal support here. We are, in some important regards, a business. But in the end, and in the main, we are a learning community, a community of teachers and learners. This is true even if we carry the job title of staff or administrator. Teaching and learning are why we exist at all. Third, community is especially important at a Benedictine college. St. Benedict literally wrote the book on community life. Benedict's genius was his insight that God is best sought and served in a community. Benedict began his religious career as a solitary hermit, living in a cave 30 miles east of Rome. But he became famous as the abbot of a community and the author of a rule that has become the blueprint for most of Western monasticism because it lays down the basic norms for living together in the pursuit of holiness. But Benedict was an abbot, not an academic, and his observations about the nature of community were developed in a monastery, not in a college. The task for us is to adapt his monastic insights for an academic context. This is precisely the topic that the presidents of the Association of Benedictine Colleges and Universities, 14 of us in North America, have been discussing for the past several years. We began by asking a group of 5 Benedictine monastics, men and women, to draft a paper identifying the essential marks of Benedictine life. The result was an essay that singled out 10 hallmarks. And I'm going to quote from the paper. 10 core values can be distilled from the rule of Benedict: love, prayer, stability, conversatio, that is conversion, obedience, discipline, humility, stewardship, hospitality, and community. Continuing the quote, individual monastics steep themselves in these values. St. Benedict promises that by doing so, his disciples will come to the point where they run the way of God's commands with the inexpressible sweetness of love. This is the transformation of life that is at the heart of Benedictine monastic life. Close quote. The presidents invited the abbots and prioresses of our institutions to work with them to translate these hallmarks into the academic setting. And the lion's share of that work took place on our campus 4 summers ago when we hosted the annual meeting of the association. What resulted from our effort, that is the presidents working with the religious superiors, is a paper that will be posted on our website and that I recommend to all of you, Education Within the Benedictine Wisdom Tradition. It reflects the work of both monastics and academics, although it has a single voice provided appropriately by its final editor, Brother Dietrich Reinhardt, who was both a monk and a college president. Shortly after the paper was completed, Dietrich died of cancer. The torch was passed. The final version of the paper contains the following passage. To be sure, a school is a different social and cultural entity than a monastery. However, an institution of higher education founded and sponsored by a Benedictine monastery cannot help but be influenced by the fundamental concerns of the monastics. Therefore, the core values that animate their life, love, prayer, stability, conversatio, obedience, discipline, humility, stewardship, hospitality, and community, find a home in Benedictine colleges and universities and can be seen as hallmarks of educational vitality and fidelity to their mission. After reading and reflecting on the paper several times, I've come to think that the 10 hallmarks are really ways of making essentially the same point. What's important here is not a list of values that we should memorize, but rather their consistent portrayal of what it means to be a Benedictine learning community. The starting point is conversatio, that is, the idea that the purpose of education is transformation. Benedictine education is a descendant of the wisdom tradition. Quote, like the most ancient of wisdom traditions, Benedictine education sets its sights on the transformation of the human mind and heart. Benedictine education stresses the formation of the whole person rather than the intellect alone. Close quote. This idea that higher education is concerned with both intellectual and moral preparation is different from the conception of higher education as exclusively workforce preparation. Yes, our students need to find jobs and we need to prepare them, but we get the emphasis all wrong if we make this the primary objective. The deepest purpose of Benedictine education is not utility, it is personal transformation. Likewise, the Benedictine emphasis on educating the whole person is different from the idea of value-free education that is concerned only with intellectual development, leaving questions of value and purpose to parents and pastors. Yes, we must teach our students to think critically and independently, but the wisdom tradition knows that rigor without direction and power without purpose are empty and may be dangerous. This is why the cultivation of moral imagination and moral courage are important to us. So, Benedictine education is concerned with the transformation of persons. What kind of transformation exactly? The answer is the kind of transformation that happens when we fall in love. Benedictine monasticism is about falling in love with God, and Benedictine education is about falling in love with learning and with great truths. It is for this reason that I believe Benedict's insights are transferable from one type of community to the other. Love here is not a sentimental concept. It doesn't mean feeling good. Love means being drawn out of ourselves in the name of something larger. The big human questions, important ideas, great works of literature and art and music, the great discoveries of science. Real love is hard work. As we saw in our campus discussion 2 years ago, the love of learning can be a tough love. Love requires us to put the needs of the beloved ahead of our own egos. It requires that we deal with subjects that we find intimidating. It means admitting our ignorance and our errors. It entails accepting constructive criticism gracefully. The truth is a demanding lover. What are the habits of heart and mind that lead to transformation? What are the defining characteristics of an educational community whose purpose is the transformation of persons? Humility and hospitality come immediately to mind. Why is the pursuit of truth, like the search for God, more effective in community than on our own? Because, quote, by ourselves alone, none of us can learn what we most need to know or bring to completion what most needs to be done, close quote. This is the beginning of wisdom. Just because we realize that no one of us has the whole truth, we need to be open to the other, be it an idea, a person, or an experience. And I mean really open, vulnerable, open to being changed, even transformed. How ironic it would be if a community that is committed to transformation were not itself open to being transformed. In our efforts over the past several years to become a more inclusive community, we've learned that hospitality goes way beyond extending an invitation for others to join us. Real hospitality means that we will ourselves be changed when others accept our invitation. I know that when I met last spring with a group of our international and domestic students of color to listen with the ear of my heart to their stories and their experiences of racism in our city and on our campus, I left the room a changed person, and I hope a better leader. What other attitudes or virtues are important in an educational community that is committed to transformation? In the list of hallmarks, there are several that can only be described as old-fashioned and out of step with much of contemporary life. Prayer, stability, obedience, discipline. Come to St. Scholastica and learn obedience and discipline probably isn't a strong marketing message to 17-year-olds. Am I right, Jeff? But these countercultural attitudes turn out to be exactly the ones that transformation requires. Take prayer. In the monastic context, this means, among other things, Lectio Divina, divine reading, the slow, meditative reading of scriptural texts to understand what God may be saying. In the academic context, prayer can be translated as attentiveness or mindfulness to a lecture, to a primary text, to one another. In a world of sound bites and tweets, students are easily frustrated by complex arguments and nuanced texts. We need to teach them discipline and obedience. Yes, obedience. That is faithfulness to a text. I remember once asking a class to read an article, and then, the next time we met, asking them what the author said about a certain topic. Up went a hand, and the student proceeded to tell me exactly what he thought about the topic. That response was undisciplined, disobedient, and self-centered. An educated person knows how to be obedient to a text or an argument before reacting to it. Indeed, academic freedom is itself a form of obedience. We follow a trail of evidence where it leads us, not where we want it to go. The cultivation of discipline, of mindfulness, and of obedience takes time, effort, and support. This is why one of the hallmarks of a Benedictine community is stability. I'm reminded of this every time I walk through the Sisters' Cemetery. We are in this together and for the long haul. We search for wisdom together through good times and bad. We take care of one another along the journey. We want to cultivate lasting relationships with our students and with each other. Organizations need new blood and new ideas, but there's a lot to be said, too, for long and stable tenures. In the end, we want to create a learning community that transforms individuals who will then work to transform the human community. The Hallmarks paper makes this point nicely. Quote, "Though directly grounded in a particular place, the commitments and aspirations of Benedictine life can only bear fruit if they stretch to horizons that are truly universal." Close quote. Like the concept of human person, the idea of community has an inner dynamic that resists arbitrary restriction. Having been transformed by the love of learning, we take on responsibilities to our neighbors and our descendants. The philosopher Peter Singer talks about the expanding circle. Service learning and stewardship are natural expressions of a Benedictine learning community. I'll conclude with two reminders. First, we are all in this community together. Thank you. We are all teachers, and we are all learners. Whether we work inside or outside the classroom, all of us should take to heart the 10 hallmarks and find ways to model them. The important work of transformation belongs to each of us and to all of us together. It's what gives us our common purpose. Second, although we have grown and become a more complex organization, serving many different kinds of students and offering programs in different formats, we are and we want to be one college. We are one college because we are animated by one heritage, one mission, one vision of the transformative power of education. Over nearly a century, we have learned how to create the kind of community that transforms young women and, more recently, young men. Our systems are well designed for this purpose. Now, as we are reaching out to older learners and to online learners, we need to expand and reimagine our systems. We need to create new forms of Benedictine learning communities. The hallmarks of the Benedictine wisdom tradition have survived many social changes over 15 centuries. These hallmarks are adaptable. Now we should translate their power for the digital age. So, I propose for our discussion this year the following question. What are the most effective ways that we can cultivate the hallmarks of a Benedictine learning community for one another, and for all our students here, at our extended sites, and online. As always, I look forward to working with you. Thank you.